Have you ever finished up a shoot and thought to yourself, wow, I just crushed that. The client is for sure gonna hire me again, and then they don't? Well, I know that I have, but after scaling my own business and my client's business to well over $20,000 a month, I've realized it's because of one thing: I didn't get my clients addicted to paying me. So today I wanna walk you through my 6-step process that turns clients from pretty much strangers into raving superfans that wanna pay you monthly. And I'm not kidding, because if you do this right, your next client interaction might look like this.
You're like a drug. We love you when you're here, and we really miss you when you go dark.
All right, so before we get into all the steps, I first want to illustrate why this is so powerful when you implement it. Have you ever just craved an ice cold lemonade on a super hot day and you went to the fridge, super excited, you open it up and there's just water in there? I don't know about you, but sometimes I get annoyed by that because I just want something sweet, not just bland water. Well, that's the same feeling that your clients get when they hire you and you produce good quality content, but it doesn't actually get them results or bookings or sales, and likely they're probably not going to rehire you again. But when you can create content that actually gets results for your clients, then they think to themselves, well, dang, that's exactly what we needed. And when you can create that feeling over and over and over again, it's kind of like having a fully stashed fridge full of lemonade that your clients can just go to, grab, and be refreshed. And that is the secret to having long-term retainers. So to show you how to create this effect for all of your clients so you get more long-term retainers, I'm gonna walk you through a demo client. So in this case, let's use a restaurant. And let's just assume a few things. So number one is that they're more of a culinary experience, not just a place that you get food. And two is that they have a higher priced menu, and maybe it's more custom, more seasonal. They use artisan ingredients, all that kind of stuff. So higher end. All right, so let's jump into the system. So step one of this system is super, super critical, because if you get this wrong, nothing else matters and nothing else works. And it all centers around this idea that clients don't actually pay you for content. They pay you for the results that your content produces, which typically is going to be something in the realm of traffic, sales, or a cheaper cost to acquire a customer. So in other words, they're actually hiring you to make them more money. And if you can't make them more money, then they have no reason to rehire you, right? So we're going to view everything for the rest of this video from that lens, but the question becomes, well, how do I create videos that actually get results for clients? It's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, because all you have to do is understand this chart here, which is actually the very first thing that I walk my one-to-one clients through as soon as they sign on with us. So think back to any time that you've ever bought anything on the internet. What is the first thing that you do? Well, you probably saw some piece of content, whether a photo or video, and it just made you aware that the product existed. Now, most times you're probably not going to make a purchase right then and there. So you'll actually go through some sort of research phase where you're either comparing against other competitors, maybe you're looking at spec sheets, maybe you're just doing a little bit of research. And then at a certain point in time, you're presented with a button that says buy now. And if it's the right time and the right place and you have enough information, guess what? You pull the trigger and you make the purchase. So in other words, there's a lot of little steps in between someone being a stranger and just finding out about the product and actually handing over money. And there's actually usually more steps the more expensive the product is. So we really need to get away from this idea of just selling a single video or just selling a few videos, like 3 or 4, right? Because really what we need to do is create a video funnel that turns somebody from a cold stranger into a customer that's paying our client money. And if you can do that, you'll have no problem ever signing a client again. Okay, so now that we know the general funnel that we're trying to create, now we can move on to step number 2, which is gonna help you avoid the biggest mistake I see creators chasing all the time, which is going viral. You know, the thing that everybody tells you to do. And I used to think that too, but just because a video gets a bunch of views doesn't mean that it's getting a bunch of sales. I mean, think about it. When's the last time you saw a viral video that you actually bought a product from? Probably almost never. But most of the content education out there today that you either see on YouTube or Instagram or whatever, courses, is designed to teach you how to get as many views as humanly possible using like tricks and hacks and all these different things, but not how to create content that actually gets sales, which is actually a very different thing. All right, so to illustrate this, let's just imagine that you're scrolling Instagram and you see a video kind of like this. So what's the point of this video? Is it to educate and nurture and encourage people to go to the restaurant? Or is it more of just the filmmaker flexing his editing and filming skills? Well, I would actually argue that it's the latter. And I got trapped by this so much, because even though it's a cool video that I can appreciate as a filmmaker, I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know anything about the restaurant, where it is, or why I should even go there. But on the flip side, I would go to this restaurant, which I know is consistently packed out all days out of the week, because they didn't follow what worked for the wrong audience and just chase trends that get a bunch of views. They implemented what worked for the right audience, the one that they knew would want to go patronize at their restaurant, and they just did a bunch of that. And I know this works because it literally worked for my client Rajveer, who implemented this system, and within the first week, his client, who was a restaurant, went from virtually dead, not that many people went, to literally having to shut the front doors because they were so busy and they couldn't handle the volume. So that's why step 2 is just matching the type of content we create and the concepts to the result that the client wants. wants, which most of the time is going to be sales. And the tough part about this for filmmakers, usually this means that you're not going to do like crazy cinematic B-roll or fancy edits or some kind of crazy transitions. All you really need is clear, simple visuals, clear, simple messaging, and that's what gets people to actually take an action. And by the way, you'll know that you've nailed this when you start to look at the comments. And number one, you're actually getting comments, but number two, the comments are less about your editing style and how like cinematic the video is, and it's more around people tagging their friends and saying, oh my goodness, we need to go here, or like making comments about the actual client that you have. All right, so that brings us on to step number 3, which is critical for getting clients that want to pay you for more than just a few videos, which we talked about. It's obviously part of the funnel. So let's just imagine that a client saw your first video and they're like, wow, this looks really cool. They click on the profile of the restaurant and they go to it and all they see is this. So obviously there's an instant disconnect here because they're clicking on it and they're wanting to learn more about the restaurant and they just get a bunch of random stuff and we're hiring and it's horrible for building trust. So what should you do instead? Well, you've probably talked to clients before where they're just like, hey, we need a few videos for social. You make a few videos for social and then they post them and then they run out and then now they're back at square one. So then what do? A photo refresher, right? And they have all these like nice high quality photos, but when's the last time you went to a restaurant because you saw a high quality photo of broccoli? Probably not that often, right? And to take that even further, when's the last time you made a purchasing decision after seeing one video? Again, probably not that often, especially if it's a higher ticket item. But when all you're selling your clients are a few videos, that's actually what you're assuming people do, is that they only need a few videos to get the result that the client wants. But the truth is, most people need at least 7 touch points before they make any kind of buying decision. So if each of those touch points aren't making people closer and closer and closer to making a buying decision, it doesn't matter how good of a video your first touch point was, because you're just going to lose them and they'll probably not make a purchase, which means that you're not getting your clients more business. And this becomes even more important the more expensive the product is. So like, for example, I work with resorts, which is a very high ticket item. So not only are you paying thousands of dollars just to stay at the resort, but you're also paying for airfare a lot of times, or you're also paying with your time, right? Because most people are staying between 3 days to a week. So that's a lot of time. So people don't make these decisions in like 2 seconds. They actually have to do some research and they need some time to be able to make these decisions. So what you have to do is ask yourself, okay, if someone is not going to make a decision off of one video, what are the questions or what are the things that I would need to see in order to make a buying decision to go to this restaurant or to buy this product? And then you reverse engineer the content that you create. So if we go back to our restaurant example, is their ideal customer the one that's actually paying them money to go to that restaurant? Do they want to see a bunch of flashy, quick cut, crazy animation, transition stuff to go to that restaurant? Or are they more likely interested in the ambiance, the experience? Maybe it's a custom menu. Maybe they have new food options. Maybe they want to know where the food is sourced. Or maybe they just want to know how the experience is because they're thinking about bringing their wife there on a date night. So really this step that I'm talking about here is about creating a binge trap. So once we attract someone's attention, we need to create content that answers all the main questions that they have running through their head so that they view this restaurant as an absolute no-brainer for their next date night. And if we can do that, then we have a much higher chance that those people will actually go in the door. Which brings us to step number 4. So now that we know the funnel, we have an attention-grabbing video on the front end, we've created some sort of binge trap that educates people about all the things that the restaurant has to offer. Now we have this pool of a bunch of warm leads that are aware of the restaurant, but they just need to have some sort of reason to buy. And this is where most people stop. But if you do what I'm about to show you, it's going to skyrocket your clients' traffic and sales, but it'll also help you stay on retainer longer. And the best part is it only takes you about 20 seconds of work to do. So let me show you how this works. So have you ever sat down to watch a bunch of videos and you thought to yourself, wow, this looks really sick. I definitely want to buy it at some point. And then for whatever reason, you just got distracted and then you forgot about it. Well, your clients' customers do the exact same thing. So even though you got their attention and you educated them and they're probably very interested in going to that restaurant, they get distracted and then they never do, which is costing your client thousands of dollars and it's potentially costing you a retainer client as well. But there's an easy fix that honestly, I couldn't even believe that I didn't do before. And it's literally that you just ask people to buy. And I know that sounds dumb, but you would be shocked how many people just never make a call to action. Now, there's a few different levels of this. So I'm just going to start with the lowest hanging fruit, the one that takes like 20 seconds to implement. And that's literally that you just make a call to action in the caption of the post. And then every once in a while, you throw a call to action at the end of a video. Super simple, takes you like 20 seconds and it skyrockets the amount of traffic. But there's actually another thing that you can do that's extremely ninja. Almost no one ever does it, but you can get high ticket customers for extremely cheap. So for example, I work with this client, they sell a tour, it costs $600. We're currently implementing the strategy and getting them $600 customers for $15. I mean, that's like as close to printing money as you can possibly get. All right, so here's how this works. So if you're good at creating videos, then that means that people are actually engaging with them or going to the account, which means that we, again, have that pool of warm leads. Now, again, the majority of those people are never gonna buy unless we ask them, but we also don't wanna just flood the entire page with a bunch of ads. So here's the workaround. Instead of just relying on the Instagram algorithm to magically show our advertisements to them over time, we can actually just run a retargeting ad for $5 to $10 a day that is targeted only at the people that have engaged with the account or have engaged with the client's website over the past few weeks. And the great part about this is that we can make more hard call to action type of ads where we say like a certain dollar amount of how much something costs. That probably wouldn't work organically, but because we're only showing it to the warm audience is much more likely to convert, and we don't have to spam our entire page with just a bunch of ads, which means that we're getting customers for our client for extremely cheap. And the thing is, you don't actually have to run these ads yourself. I mean, you totally can. I run them for my clients, but a lot of times you'll work with companies that have ad budgets or they have a team that runs ads for them anyways. So you just create the ad creatives for them. You kind of consult them on the strategy and then they run it for themselves and they get super cheap cost to acquire customers as well, which we talked about is one of the 3 goals that your clients want, which is great for your client, obviously, because they make more money, but it's great for you because you look like a superhero and they want to pay you a whole lot more. Which brings us to the next step, which is crucial for making sure that your clients want to stay long-term. So sometimes your clients can feel the effects of your content pretty quickly, like that example I shared earlier where they literally had to shut the door because they were so busy. But other times, maybe the person, your contact, is a little bit further away from the day-to-day operations of the business, so maybe they don't actually see the impacts as clearly, or they're just not as obvious, which doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't create results. It just means they weren't as aware of them. So here's how you avoid that. So you take what I call a day one snapshot, and it contains all the major metrics for your client's business. So think vanity metrics, things like followers, views, engagement rate, that kind of stuff. But ideally, if you can get metrics around their ad campaigns, especially if you're doing like that retargeting stuff that we talked about before. So things like click-through rates and return on ad spend, or if you can get conversion rates on the website, that's going to give you a good overall feel for how well their content's performing for them. And then you just execute the plan, the previous steps that we talked about before. And then at the end of the month, you track those numbers again. And ideally, they've become better than they were before. And all you do is compile those numbers into a report that you can show your client so they can actually see tangibly how you impacted their business. And it's super easy. It won't take you that much time, but most people will never do it, which is why most people can never prove their value and don't get on retainer. Which brings us to the final step of this process, which is going to allow you to turn those like one-off gigs or maybe short-term retainers into long-term retainers. So in order to explain how it works, let's go back to our lemonade example. So imagine that I went to a cafe and I ordered a lemonade from the waiter, and because it was so hot, I chugged the thing in like 10 seconds, and the waiter noticed that and he came over and he asked me how it was. Well, I'd probably give a raving review and I might even order another one right on the spot. Why? Because he asked me right after I had received the value. But let's play out another scenario. Let's say same thing, I go to the cafe, I chug the lemonade, but the waiter just doesn't really talk to me or anything, doesn't even ask me a question. And then maybe a week later he sees me and he's like, oh, hey, by the way, how was that lemonade? I would probably give a good review, like, oh, it was good, you know, I guess. But because I was so far removed, I probably wouldn't give that raving review that I did earlier, and I probably wouldn't be buying another one right there unless it was like the best lemonade I'd ever had in my life. Now the point is, I see so many creators that either one, never even ask for reviews or testimonials, or two, they wait forever to ask the client for the review, and at that point all the excitement and sizzle around the offer and the results you've gotten is kind of like settled, so the client isn't nearly as excited. So instead, you actually want to collect your testimonial at the point of your client's greatest satisfaction, when they actually received the initial transformation. Now there's 2 reasons we want to do this. The first thing is when you ask them about their experience, provided it was actually good, then they're gonna start talking and going on and on about how much they loved it and how great of results you got them and all this kind of stuff, which is kind of like subliminally reselling themselves on why you're so great. But simultaneously, you'll ask them about their previous state, how they were doing and what the transformation is, and they'll remind themselves about how they were before you, which means that they need you moving forward. And if they didn't have you, then their business would go backwards to where they were at before you joined. And both of these things set you up for your final move, which is basically asking them for the ascension into a year-long contract. And assuming you've done the previous 5 steps and they're stoked on your contract, content and they're stoked on your results and they actually gave you a testimonial and a review, then it should be an absolute no-brainer to get you on a long-term high-ticket retainer contract. All right, so now that you know how to get your clients addicted to paying you, you kind of need to have something to sell them. So watch this video here where I break down the anatomy of a $5,000 content offer so you can kind of just copy it. I'm gonna go get a lemonade.